Welcome to Playing Above the Line. We're a podcast that takes a peek into the daily lives of community and business leaders. Each week we uncover different views of the path to growth, leadership, and achieving success. I'm Dennis Sheeran.
And I'm Alan Cave. Dennis and I are both shareholders at Hartman, Blackman & Kilgore. We're a full-service accounting and business consulting firm. As CPAs, we've had the unique opportunity to work with many different leaders and decided we wanted a way to share their incredible stories that we've learned along the way. Today we're joined by the Very Reverend Beverly Gibson, and she is the Dean of Christ Church Cathedral in Mobile. On this episode, you'll get to learn how Reverend Gibson is working with her congregation to discern their purpose in the community.
Well, Alan, how are you today?
Dennis, I am perfect. How are you?
I'm good. Well, why don't you share with our audience our guest for the day?
All right. We are very pleased to have Reverend Beverly Gibson with us. So, Reverend, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for asking me.
So, why don't you just start and tell us a little bit about what you do today, a little bit about your background, and whatever else you'd like to share with us.
Well, what I do today is I'm clergy in the Episcopal Church, and we like titles and all of that kind of thing. We're really into that.
Yeah.
It's like the less you actually have, the more invested you are in the trimmings around it. Yeah. So I'm what's known as the dean because our church is the cathedral of our diocese.
Okay.
Our diocese is the Central Gulf Coast, which is comprised of the lower portion of Alabama from just south of Montgomery down, and the panhandle of Florida, from the Florida line over to Apalachicola. And Christ Church is the oldest Protestant church in Alabama. Actually, the Diocese of Alabama was founded here, and the church predates that from 1822.
Wow.
So that church has been here for a very long time. It's the mother church of Episcopalians in Alabama, and it has had, like all institutions of that age, its ups and downs over the years. And so I've been the dean there for the last 5 years. I've served there actually since 2005. I came in 2005 straight from seminary. This is a second vocation for me. I was in higher education before this, and then went to seminary, and then came here. So I've been in the leadership of this congregation now for 15 years almost. And it's been a really exciting thing to watch them grow and define themselves and figure out who they are and what their mission is.
You mentioned higher education before. Go Trojans. I have a son at Troy University.
Well,
so,
congratulations.
Yeah.
It's an excellent place to be.
Wonderful place. He loves it. So you were there for 18 years.
I was. I'm an Alabama native and went off to college, went off to graduate school, and ended up with great good fortune getting a job at Troy and finishing my PhD while I was there and teaching there. I met my husband there and got married, and we had our first child while we were in Troy. So that was my initial sense of calling, who I wanted to be. And then I moved further into administration as I stayed there, and I thought, well, this is not kind of why I went into this. So, and then I ended up in the ministry, quite surprisingly, actually. That's a different story. And now here I am back doing a lot of administrative work and building maintenance and building buildings and things like that. So you can't run from some things.
So let's circle back to the story of the interesting story then of how you ended up in the ministry.
We use the word discernment in the church, kind of a fancy word for figuring out what it is that you're gifted to do.
Right.
Okay.
And what it is that brings out the best in you and other people.
I think I've been doing that for 34 years
You
now.
still don't have it down, do you?
It's an ongoing process, isn't it? I'm still doing that. It's like, well, there must be something else. So when I asked that question that I mentioned a moment ago about what is it that I'm really called to do, am I really called to be an administrator, am I called to be a teacher, am I called to be, what is it? I ended up doing some of that discernment with an Episcopal priest who said, God bless him, which is not what you're supposed to do in discernment. He said, well, I can save you a lot of time and trouble. You're called to be a priest. And I said, well, that's really very funny. That's hysterical. But I put myself into the process, and it's a very long process in the Episcopal Church, but it ended up being kind of short for me. And lo and behold, I ended up being sent to seminary by my bishop, and we relocated to New York City for 3 years and loved it there. Went to seminary and had a second child while we were there, and then ended up here in Mobile and have been here ever since. So that's a really compacted version of it, and I kind of left God out of it.
Yeah.
But God was,
Sure.
all
But
through it.
I got there was a
So-
frenetic pace to that whole experience for you.
It was. It happened quickly
Yeah.
and rather surprisingly. But it's been a great journey.
So you talking about throughout in college, you first were an instructor, a professor, and you were teaching students, and that was great. Then you got into administration. You said, what am I getting into? You move into your life as a reverend and having a congregation. And what was important to you was ministering to the congregation and helping those. But then all of a sudden, you've got this other side of the church, and we can just go ahead and call it the business side of the church. Those they often can be very diverse and opposite things. How do you handle that? How do you deal with that?
Let me try to tease out the analogy since you set it up
Sure.
just a little bit. If I go back to
Yeah,
my
go ahead.
time as a teacher, what you really want to do is to help people open up to learning, and you want them to become learners, and the phrase that's used a lot is lifelong learners, but people who go out in their communities and make a difference because they want to know more, they want to be more, they want to do more, and to inculcate that. So it's a lifelong transformation that you're aiming for. And yet, what you end up having to do, because it's also a business there, and you also have to assess what you do, right, you try to measure it. In many ways, measuring the unmeasurable, but it's got to be measured. And so you have to look at all of these things about course sizes and distributions and grades, right? And how people perform on certain milestone markers along the way. So there's that, and that's the place where I ended up getting conflicted the first time, right? So then I end up in the church, right, where you're shepherding souls, right? And boy, is there really no final assessment for that one that we can measure.
That you can measure anyway, right?
Yeah.
Can't measure that one. And I do say to people sometimes, there's not a final exam here until
Right,
the real
exactly.
final exam, and I won't be there, and I don't know how you're going to do. No, that's not true. They're going to be fine. And we're all going to be fine. But that's a real tension, especially as a pastor, because you're primarily there to care for people. You're primarily there to be with them in the most intimate moments of their lives. Right. When somebody's ill, when someone's dying, when somebody's baby is born, when people get married. And you're there to be with them in their crises, and you're there to be with them in their prayers and all of those difficult moments. And yet, there's an institution that has to be run, right? There's a budget. Things cost money. There's a building. It has HVAC systems, it has, all of that. And then we get into this huge building project. So we're raising capital funds. You're constantly looking at how much does it cost to do all the things that we want to do, and how are we going to generate the revenue to do those things. I've got people who are sick. Someone's dying. I also have a construction meeting. I've got an inbox full of emails wanting me to approve this or that or the other. And I have a wonderful financial secretary who does tremendously good work, but I have to look at all of it and approve it and sit down and finance with people. So it's a constant juggling, but to understand all of those things, I think in terms of being pastoral, that is pastoral care too. If we're well administered, if we're taking care of the resources that have been entrusted to us, if we've asked people to give of their substance to do this, then part of what I'm doing is shepherding that substance too. So to be able to think about it in the right way for the right context, I think is the important thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, that's great. I mean, there's so much on your bio that you sent over that the one thing that I found interesting that I wanted to make sure we got a chance to touch on is in our business, the accounting profession, and what we try to talk to our clients about is the importance of having a vision and the planning process and setting goals and that kind of thing. And most of the time, I don't think that we think about that being applicable to a church type organization. But you specifically said in your information that you guys went through the visioning process. You've got a 3 to 10 year plan. So kind of talk about how that came about and the importance of that to your congregation and to your institution, to your church.
Well, I think that's a very important thing in the life of a congregation, that people have the opportunity to go back to that word that I was using a moment ago, to discern together what it is that they're being called to do. What's our mission in this place? Why are we here? If we disappeared next week, would anybody know? I mean, do we make a difference in this community? Do we affect others in a particular way? And how do we understand ourselves? One of the things that we did at the same time that we were raising capital funds and planning to do some really extensive things to the property was to engage a consulting group, and there are groups that do that specifically for congregations, to come in and work with the congregation on some of those things. And it was a very exciting process. Put together a large group of people representative of all sorts of demographic groups within the congregation to come together and try to articulate a very focused and clear vision for who we are and what we believe we're called to do. We had this really lengthy, what we now call an institution statement that established us as the Cathedral, but it didn't really specifically speak to the nature of that congregation of human beings who live there. So they led us through that process of coming up with a vision and then establishing a set of what we called values, or priorities would be another word, that are attached to that vision. And then out of that to identify specific, I think there are 5 to 7 3-year goals, 5-year goals, 10-year goals. And those are very measurable and concrete. And the church is like the rest of the world in that regard. You know, how many members do you have? What's your budget?
Right.
What's your giving like? You know, what are your target goals for growth in that regard? And there are a lot of people in the church world who would say that's not a good thing. And it's a conflicted thing. I'll be honest about that. I'm somewhat conflicted about it. But it's helpful because everybody's looking forward, and they're looking upward and outward, and they're saying we're called to move and to grow and to live, and how are we going to go about doing that?
To me, there are measures. Some measures, you look at them and say, I get that. But on the other side of that, there's somewhat of, I got to think for your congregation, it's important to them how they are impacting that community and how they're affecting it, and having some kind of way that they are able to look and reflect upon what they've accomplished over a year or 3 years or 5, and what they still want to do to be even better.
And that's an ongoing process, and we have some, now out of this engagement with ministry architects, we have a whole set of processes and groups to do those things, to look at what we have done, to assess those things, to set some more goals for specific groups like the outreach or the service group or hospitality or pastoral care. You know, what have we done? What do we still want to do? What do we intend to do in the next year, 3 years, 5 years? So there is that. At the same time, what we try to capture, and this is maybe specific to the church world, but I think it has something of value for other organizations as well. What's really important to us? I mean, what is it that we want to grow within ourselves and help other people to grow toward? So one of the things that we've been talking about for the last year especially is some spiritual deepening and spiritual growth, practices of prayer, Bible study, things like that, which are particular to the church. But lots of organizations have those things that are important to them, whether it be the environment, whether it be your financial security, whether it be, providing for the future of your family or trusts or whatever.
I mean, that really gets back to what we talk about in our profession and what I think is common among everyone, no matter what your situation is, you got to find your why. So the church's why is not to put warm bodies in seats.
Right.
I mean, that's a byproduct, I think, but you've got to really kind of determine what your purpose is, right? And so that's what we talk about with our clients. I mean, it can't be just making money. That's a byproduct, but that can't be your why. And so I think that's what you're trying to do, I think, is define that.
Yeah,
so.
That's great. In fact, just this past Sunday, in the sermon, I was sharing with them something by Gerald May, who was, he's now passed away, but he was a physician and a psychiatrist and did some work in spirituality. But he talked about efficiency and love, and he said efficiency in life is the how, the things that we all have to do, making a living, making provision for our family, dealing with stress, all of those kinds of things that are just the stuff of life, and you can't avoid them. But we get so caught up sometimes in the efficiency of life and all the things we have to do that we forget the why. What's the reason that we do them? And in Gerald May's way of thinking, that was love. It's love for your family. It's love for your community. In our case, it's the love God has for us and our attempt to share that love with the world. So, yeah, that's exactly right. We do all share that. Why?
The congregation, you, everyone, this circles it back to a lot of what our show is about. It's a form of leading. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the church is trying to lead in certain ways, the congregation lead its community, mm-hmm. and to try to make things better. So with that in mind, kind of talk a little bit about how you view leadership, maybe back in your days at Troy, but maybe also how it's kind of evolved.
Well, way back in the day, and now I'm old enough and it was long enough ago, I have to stop sometimes and think, when was that and what did I do? They, I assume, still have an excellent leadership training program within the university itself that they use to raise people up into mm-hmm. positions of leadership within the institution. And I was fortunate to be a part of that and learned a great deal from some wonderful people about budgeting, about how this whole system works together, about revenue streams within higher mm-hmm. education itself, and also about how the different parts of the system related to each other. And one of the most interesting things I learned was how eager people were just to have somebody come and talk to them about what they do and how they understand what they do fitting into the larger picture. Mm-hmm. And that was a fascinating piece of all of that. So I reaped the benefits of that, and within the church, we talk about leadership some. We use an awful lot of secular source material for that, mm-hmm. And some of that works for us, and some of it doesn't.
Yeah, understandable.
And the truth is, and I know you guys have read a lot of that, and I've read some of it's really good, and some of it's just not.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Leading, one of the fundamental beliefs I have about leadership is it's about others. It's not about yourself ever. Right. But two, it's more of influence. Yeah. There's a lot of influence that really is leading. You spend more time doing that. And so listening to your story, I hear a lot of that, of how the things that you're doing as a congregation, the things you're doing as the dean of that congregation, are about trying to influence people in positive ways.
Well, to help people become the highest and best that God mm-hmm. is calling them to be, and to share that with the community. One of the things in the Episcopal worship service that happens at the end after communion is that we all say a prayer together. And part of that prayer, it's right before we leave, is giving thanks for what we've received in worship and asking for the strength and the courage to go out into the world and do the things that we're now called to do. And so the last thing that the priest says at the end of the service is, go in peace to love and serve the Lord. So the idea is that you come in here to get yourself strengthened and ready and to refresh your vision and your heart. And then the real stuff happens when you go out into the world. And who you are in your business, who you are with your family. And that's the real impact. And I think that the whole idea of leadership, both ordained and lay, is to help people strengthen that all the time.
That's great mm-hmm. stuff. And Dennis, all of our best guests have one thing in common. They all have a tie to Auburn University. And so I know that one of the Reverend's degrees is from Auburn. Her son Dylan graduated from Auburn. And I know your daughter Eleanor is at St. Paul right now. But talk a little about that. And the one thing I'm interested in is your son teaches English in Taiwan.
In Taiwan,
right
he
now.
does,
so
yeah.
How's that going?
Well, it's great. Actually, he's home for just a little bit. My husband had some health issues, which have thankfully resolved really very well. But our son had come to the end of his contract, and so he's come home for a couple of months to help. And now he's going back to get a degree in Chinese over there, which seems like a oddly practical thing to do in the present world.
Yeah, sure.
But he had a wonderful time at Auburn. My husband's family, I have to give them the real pitch. They are 3 generations deep of Auburn graduates. My husband didn't actually go there, but I did.
And your husband is the manager of Allocations Wines, right?
Sales manager, yeah.
Sales manager,
okay.
Uh-huh.
So he's in the wine business, and my congregation has always appreciated that.
I'm sure, because you get the best communion wine, right?
That's right.
Well, they get what they want. Let's put it that way.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so at age 16, you were a census taker.
I was, yeah.
So tell
Had
me
to
about
dig
that.
up that one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you put it on here.
I did.
Ask
It just came to me. You know, when you learn to drive and you get your driver's license and you can get that first job where you can take yourself kind of from place to place. This is back in the day, right? We were not gender sensitive back then. Guys cut the grass and they did things like that, and girls did babysitting, which they still do. So I'd done a lot of that, but the first job that I got was working as a census taker. It was wretched. Reams of paper and pencils and a clipboard, and you're going door to door and asking people to verify the information that you had. And it was a small town. It was Andalusia, Alabama. Most people, you knew three-quarters of the people. But still, it was just, you were imposing, I felt, on people.
Yeah.
And they felt that too. Lots of times people weren't home or you couldn't get to them, and then you were coming back.
Right.
I do not remember the name of the man who was our local, whatever his title was. But I do remember looking at him and thinking, this must just be an awful job. To have to supervise teenagers and people who are looking for temporary work and go
maybe
through
not
all
the
this.
most motivated
Right.
workforce in the country, you know.
Perhaps not. And he seemed a little weary with the whole thing.
So you've been working with if you started that at 16 and then, you know, with teaching at Troy and then with your congregation, I mean, you've dealt with the, quote, public, I guess, for a long time.
I guess I have.
Yeah. So
get right down to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, what have you found have been some of the challenges? I mean, you know, having to lead a diverse congregation, I would think, would have its challenges because, you know, like all stakeholders, they have different opinions and different wants and they perceive that they have different needs and that kind of thing. So what are some of the challenges about dealing with that?
Well, people, they're just people all the time. And one of the not so nice things that, well, I can't tell you what we said at Troy. We had they had a slogan back in that day that was one student at a time.
Okay.
Because it was that personal touch. But that's not really the way the faculty phrased it. We had a different way of saying that. But in the church, one of the things that we say in the staff meetings here is when people do something that you wish they wouldn't do, I say, well, at least it's consoling to know that people always behave as you will expect. Right?
Yes, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll surprise you in a really wonderful way and you receive it as a gift. But most of the time they behave as you would expect.
Yeah.
Because they're people.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. It's human nature.
That is, that's a good insight. I'm gonna write that down so I can read that every day before I go, you know, out in the world and just realize that I shouldn't be surprised most of the time about what happens. So.
I think our producer may have just typed that in over there. So, well, are you asking your questions today?
Yeah, I've got a new one today. So go ahead,
Okay,
get yours out of the way, and I've got a new
All right.
one. So.
We always like to start the close with different things, and for me today, it's like, tell us what you're reading that you're finding that's interesting and insightful or fun or silly or.
I love to read, and I'm always reading all sorts of different things. Right now, I'm doing some reading, getting ready for an 18-month leadership course, actually, that I'm about to undertake. It's with the Shalem Institute, and they're really focused on spirituality and the development in this particular course of congregational leaders' spirituality. So I'm doing a lot of reading in the history of the wisdom way in Western Christianity. And some books about discernment. Parker Palmer's little book, Let Your Life Speak, which is a wonderful book that's not particularly faith-based, but it's about what it is we're each called to do and how we find that and listen to that and how it's constantly changing.
Yeah. Well, I do have one more question, but I would be remiss because I just saw this on your bio if I didn't ask about this. So one of your hobbies is collecting fountain pens and inks.
Yeah.
That's probably the most.
Got to hear about that.
Yeah, I do. That's probably the most interesting thing I've heard so far from our guests as far as a collection or a hobby. So yeah. So how did that?
I have a certain amount of shame about that.
I think it's cool. I mean,
well, it's great fun. It really is great fun. And then when you meet somebody else who also has that hobby, it's a major geek out.
So what would be maybe your most prized pen that you have, and what makes it so?
I think the most special one that I have to me is the Big Mont Blanc, and I bought it way back in the day, and I used it to write my doctoral exams with.
Oh, wow.
It's like a holy object for me. But I've got some beautiful ones that different people have given me, and they make me think of those people, and I enjoy it.
Well, in this day of texting and emails and people using word processors and stuff, I mean the joy of writing with a real fine instrument, I think, is probably something that a lot of people don't get the chance to recognize. So, well, we could sit here and talk, I think, for another 2 hours, but our time has come to an end. But so the last question I have is this: if I could give you the power right now to rid the world of one thing at this very moment, what would you take out of this world?
Fear. When we talk about why did Jesus come, right? And there's some people who will talk about salvation, and that is true. But I believe he came to awaken us to love and to possibility and to cast out fear. And he said that over and over again, that he came to cast out fear. And when angels appear, always in the Bible, the first thing they say is, do not be afraid.
Do not be afraid. Yeah.
Do not be afraid.
I'm smiling, folks.
That's
that was wonderful.
I can't think of a better way to end our time. Reverend, thank you very much. We enjoyed it.
Thank y'all. It was fun. Enjoyed it.
You can learn more about Beverly and Christ Church Cathedral through the links in the show notes.
Well, thanks for listening to our podcast today. To never miss an episode, subscribe to Playing Above the Line at iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcast. And be sure to leave us a rating. We'd love to know what you think about our show.
To contact us or to stay connected, follow us on social media at HBKCPAS on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.